Welcome, welcome, welcome to the third installment of Wealth Strategies Unleashed on Social Security. I'm Robert Gilliland.
And I'm Mike Alexander.
Thank you very much for joining us. As I just said a second ago, this is our third installment on a topic that is vitally important to people. We have these conversations with clients all the time, and that is Social Security. With us, we're very, very fortunate to have Mike Graci, who's made it his life's work to become an expert in Social Security. And Mike, thank you very much for joining us.
Robert, thanks for having me again. I appreciate it.
You know, in this segment, what we're going to talk about are the life change types of benefits. And unfortunately, it's a part of life. All too often, we work with a widow or a widower, and there are just a tremendous number of questions around Social Security. Can you kind of start at a high level, kind of talking about survivor benefits? And then maybe we can talk about a few stories and when to kind of collect and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. You're right about the fact that these are difficult conversations to have. Difficult conversations for couples to have, right? What should I do in the event my spouse or partner passes away, or what should she do, right? If the reverse happens. And these are conversations that oftentimes don't happen, right? So it's valuable to, again, have an advocate in my corner that can be able to engage with me and engage with my spouse around these important conversations. So when the time comes, the unfortunate time comes, that we're prepared and we know what to do. Many times in the real world, Robert, a widower, for example, goes down to Social Security, attempts to find out about their benefits, and they try to make a decision at literally the worst time of their life, the passing of their spouse. And that's when mistakes get made. Social Security is not designed to give us advice. They are there to process transactions, quite frankly. And I like to say a lot of great people work at Social Security, and you might get the right agent on the right day with the right level of caffeine and get great advice. But why leave that to chance? Why not have an advocate, have an advisor who's able to engage in advance around these really, really important topics? Hey, so Mike, what do you want to know about?
Well, let me ask you a question about that. So if heaven forbid I got run over by that bus yesterday, it's never today and it's never tomorrow, it was yesterday. That way I'm not calling my own demise. If I got run over by that bus yesterday, my advice to widows and widowers, people who've lost a spouse, is, look, we don't want to make any sort of significant financial decisions for a period of about a year. You've got a lot that you've got to adjust. Does that spouse hurt themselves, or Social Security has the ability to kind of look back, right?
Yeah, they will look back for a period of months, but they're not going to go back over a period of years and look at that. I would agree with your assessment on most cases around Social Security. There are a couple of kind of concrete rules to which to kind of think about. Now, recognize if the couple is already collecting Social Security benefits,
right,
the surviving spouse is going to be able to collect the greater of their own benefit or their partner's, right? If I predecease my wife and her benefit is lower than mine, her benefit goes away and she jumps up to mine. And that happens really almost immediately upon notification of my passing. Right. So that's one element. If I'm in a situation where we haven't started to collect Social Security, right, or maybe we're younger, then some of those discussions come into place. For example, a widow or widower has the ability to collect a survivor benefit as early as age 60, right? Remember, 60. You're not even old enough to collect your own Social Security,
Right.
but a widower could collect a survivor benefit. So in this particular situation, if you have a widower or widow who's 60, they should begin to look at, okay, should I collect a survivor benefit at this point, right? Recognizing that if you're taking any benefit early, that benefit is subject to a reduction. So if I'm collecting a survivor benefit at 60, they're going to reduce it, Robert, by a lot, 28.5% reduction. But that benefit can begin to collect. Now, remember from our earlier discussions, the earnings limit test that comes into play, right? That always applies. That applies whether or not you're collecting a survivor benefit, a spousal benefit, or your own. If you're taking it prior to your full retirement age and you're working, right, you're subject to that wage test. So let me share a story, a real story that occurred in a client that attended a seminar I did about a year or so ago. She was a school teacher in Ohio, and her spouse had passed away, and she was 60 years old. So she went down to Social Security. She applied for survivor benefits, and she came away with this impression: you're not eligible for that benefit. You make too much money. Now, what Social Security was referring to was the wage test that we talked about, right? She was still working at the time. But within 6 months, she actually retired. But she didn't think she was eligible for that survivor benefit. So by the time I had actually met her, she was 64 years old and hadn't been collecting a benefit for possibly 4 years, right? Social Security didn't go back and pay her retroactively. So it was a lost opportunity. Again, kind of reinforces where we opened on the importance of having discussions in advance to understand what that might come into place.
But did her benefit go up from 60 to 64? Benefit?
Yeah.
Went up,
So
right?
in instance, what would have been a strategy for her to consider would be to take the survivor benefit in this instance, because she retired at 60, begin to collect the survivor benefit and delay her own Social Security. And depending upon the level of the benefits, it's possible to delay your own Social Security. You could collect it at 62, but you could push it all the way out until 70. And like we talked about earlier, not only collect a full benefit, but earn those delayed retirement credits and COLAs. Start with a survivor benefit first, collect your own benefit, let's say as late as age 70. And recognizing that appropriate sequence for collecting those benefits could potentially add hundreds of thousands of dollars over the life expectancy of the survivor, knowing the right sequence. But the key to your point is, if I make that decision up front that I'm going to take my own benefit because I don't think I'm eligible, I could cost myself that opportunity, right?
It seems like people forget that one an awful lot, Mike. Just this whole idea of getting a survivor benefit and then, delaying taking your own. What happens if they remarry, or they, their life situation changes along that path?
Yeah. Great question. A widow or widower who remarries after age 60 doesn't lose the ability to collect that survivor benefit. So let's say you have a widow or widower who is collecting a survivor benefit and they remarry later. They're not going to lose that benefit. They're going to keep collecting it. Now, it might be possible that their second spouse or new spouse has actually greater Social Security benefits than they were collecting. It could be possible to have a step up at some point down the road, right? Again,
That step up is a spousal benefit, right?
yeah.
Gotcha.
Let's say a widow remarries. They're collecting a survivor benefit, but the benefit of their new spouse is greater. The new spouse also predeceases our widow. Because that's eligible for greater benefits, they could step up. Okay, see where see how that
sounds like
change
people need to
potentially
be very
follows.
vigilant on this, Mike, because certainly, situations can change pretty rapidly, and you have to be pretty mindful of, kind of where you are.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The other thing to recognize is that that age 60 point. Robert, you share
Yeah,
with me a story.
I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, have a client who's a widow, and she has become engaged, and just so happens that all she has to do is wait a little bit of time in order to be able to guarantee those. Luckily, they've made the decision that they're going to wait until after age 60. But it is nonetheless, there was a decision point, right? There's a part of that is I want to get on with my life. There's the other part is that this potentially could be worth $1 million or $500,000 inside of there. And so we had to go through and look at the numbers and say, hey, hold on, this is real money. Let's and you don't want to, obviously you're not wanting to make decisions all based totally off of money, but let's figure out if there's another route that we can go to make sure that you have security and don't have to worry.
Again, you don't want to change somebody's mind, but it's valuable, right? To analyze, to say, hey, if we make some adjustments by a couple of months, what's the impact there? Again, valuable advice, valuable opinions to get that quite frankly, I've heard many times over the years where people were not aware, and they made certain life decisions without taking those things into account.
So
yeah.
on the key of it, is there a time that I have to be married in order to be eligible for those survivor benefits?
Yeah, you have to be married at least 1 year to be eligible to get survivor benefits off of a new spouse's partner. If you've already are of eligible age to collect Social Security, they shrink that down by a couple of months. But that's pretty much the standard rule to be married for at least 1 year.
So okay, so the kind of the takeaway, so that we can kind of maybe transition to kind of divorce, which is unfortunately in a lot of situations we also deal with. Survivor, the key is in order to collect your survivor benefits, it's age 60. You can get remarried at any point after the age of 60 and not affect your benefits. But if you are 55 and a widow and you get remarried, you just lost your survivor benefits, right?
Yeah, you're now then going to be collecting benefits based off of survivor benefits would be based off of the current spouse if you remarry prior to reaching age 60. Yes.
This is half tongue-in-cheek question. Can you collect multiple survivor benefits?
Yeah, I oftentimes tell a fictional story around someone who is collecting I use myself as an example with a PIA, let's say a benefit of 0, where I reach retirement and I've been married and divorced 2 times. Both of my exes had greater benefits. One had a maximum benefit. I would start collecting spousal benefits based off of the one with the highest work record. But then the other spouse predeceases. I could jump to collect a survivor benefit off of that spouse. And then if I outlived my other spouse as well, jump once more. So yes, it's important to kind of keep track of maybe all your exes that you meet requirements for along the way. Well, Social Security should do that for you, but again, why leave it to chance, right?
So let's do that. Let's talk about divorce.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, I don't want them to collect off of my benefit. They don't really have a choice, right? It doesn't affect their benefit.
That's the key, Robert, is that it does not affect the other individual within that situation. The most common question people always ask us about Social Security and divorce, right, is, what happens when people get married multiple times? And Mike has heard me tell this story before. You have too, Robert, about the late night entertainer Johnny Carson, right? And if you follow Johnny Carson, he used to talk about it on his show. He was married 4 times. But what always interested me about Johnny's story was his 3 ex-wives. Now, his 3 ex-wives all met the requirements for collecting spousal benefits in divorce. Now, those requirements are, and I probably should have started with that, is the couple had to be married for at least 10 years. The spouse that wants to collect on the ex's work record has to be unmarried when they go to collect, and all spouses have to be of eligible age, meaning they're at least age 62. So if a couple meets these requirements, an ex-spouse could be eligible to collect spousal benefits, but also potentially survivor benefits. And the amount of spousal and survivor benefits in eligible divorce situations are exactly the same as the calculation of spousal benefits we talked about in our last podcast. No difference. So in the case like Johnny Carson, what's interesting to me is he was married to all 3 of his ex-wives. All 3 of them met those requirements. He was married to each one for more than 10 years. None of them ever remarried. So when they would have been eligible for Social Security, all 3 of Johnny's ex-wives would have been eligible to collect that spousal benefit. Remember, 50% of Johnny's PIA, his primary insurance amount. Here's the key, Robert. They didn't have to share it. They could each get that 50%. And later, when Johnny died, all 3 of his ex-wives would have jumped from the spousal benefit up to that survivor benefit. Remember, 100% of Johnny's benefit plus any delayed retirement credits he probably earned. And the key was the 4th wife. She wasn't penalized. She was married to Johnny at the time. She was eligible for the same benefits. So in my theoretical Johnny Carson story, and I must say theoretical because I don't know what they did, but you get 4 people plus Johnny himself collecting off of that single work record. Guess what? That's how it can work.
So Mike, I guess if anybody has any questions about the solvency of Social Security, we need to blame Johnny Carson for that. So let's pivot real quickly. I mean, we talked a lot. We've talked a lot about situations of divorce, and certainly in terms of survivor benefits. But one of the things that we do get asked a lot about, and we haven't spoken about, and that is, what about beneficiaries? What happens in situations where you have beneficiaries that may have the opportunity for a benefit? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, obviously we talked about a lot about spousal and survivor benefits. Other beneficiaries who are eligible to collect, we should talk about those. One last note to kind of hit on spousal and survivor benefits. As you know, you might have a couple where, because of the level of their benefits, and even a divorced couple, the lower benefited spouse is not eligible for spousal benefits because, remember, their benefit is greater than 50% of their partners. However, they could be eligible for survivor benefits at some point down the road if their higher benefit spouse predeceases them. Many times with divorced couples, a divorced individual will recognize, I'm not eligible for a spousal benefit, but loses sight of the fact that they may be eligible for survivor benefits at some point down the road. Important distinction of not to lose sight, again, of these potential benefit options as we move forward. But the 2 key things to your question, Mike, that I want to focus on is who else is eligible. Unmarried children are eligible for benefits if they're under 18 or 19, still in high school, or if the child was disabled prior to reaching age 22. And sometimes we have clients with a significant age disparity between the spouses. So a younger spouse who is caring for a minor child under age 16, or one that was disabled, could be eligible to collect a benefit as well. But The avenue or the story that I wanted to share with you is one you know, Mike, well, is my own situation. My wife, Jane, and I, we have 3 children, but our middle son, Tony, who, believe it or not, Mike, turned 30 this year, is disabled. You know, my son has autism, and his autism is pretty severe. So he's never really going to have a career of his own. But he's going to be able to collect a benefit from Social Security equal to 50% of my PIA or my wife Jane's when we file for Social Security. But more importantly, he's going to be able to collect a survivor benefit, 75% of ultimately my PIA, because it's greater than Jane's, after I'm gone, and collect it for the rest of his life. So the reason this story is important is that as a disabled, non-working adult, like my son, Tony, he's eligible for another governmental benefit. It's a need-based program. People are familiar. It's called SSI, Supplemental Security Income. And Tony gets SSI today. But when you compare his SSI benefits to a benefit based off of my PIA or even Jane's, and definitely those survivor benefits, he's going to step up when the time comes. I've been doing this stuff for 30 years, right? Even I didn't know that nuance around Social Security until we really started coaching on this program 10 to 12 years ago. And it's going to have a huge impact in my own personal situation.
And now, is there a declaration or something? There has to be some sort of paperwork, right, that you have to utilize with Social Security to be able to declare that?
Yeah. What's important is that Tony, in my situation, or the disabled child, it has to meet Social Security's definition of disability. If he meets that definition and that disability occurred prior to age 22, it doesn't have to have been diagnosed, but occurred prior to that point, the individual then becomes eligible. If the individual, for whatever reason, is no longer deemed as disabled, those benefits could go away, right? But in all likelihood, especially in my situation, that's not going to be the case. So remember from where we started in our first podcast, in our first 2 minutes, right? Robert, you talked about the fact that a lot of people think Social Security is an individual decision. And then we talked about how, but wait a minute, if you're married, it's not a single life decision, it's a joint life decision. But in my family, it's not a single life, it's not a joint life. We now have the complexity of my son's benefits as well. All of that impacts when Jane or I might potentially start collecting our Social Security benefits, right? I think everybody on your podcast knows somebody who has a disabled family member, and we could all attest that most of them probably have no idea that these benefits are there. And that's why I'm so thankful you asked me the question, because I strongly hope and pray that everyone who's in a situation similar to mine has an advocate like the two of you to be able to navigate these really challenging conversations. What are some of your thoughts on how you do this in your practice?
You can clearly see, and we've noticed it in talking with clients, is that when you thoroughly understand what those benefits are, there's kind of a peace of mind, right? Of understanding and knowing that, hey, okay, there's money there's at least some money that's going to be there. And it kind of, there's almost like a freedom in that knowledge. And that's really the key. That's where the planning and cash flow and making sure that, especially when you have someone who has special needs or disabled, that you make sure that you're planning the right way, because there are special things that have to happen. And so I think that's exactly what Social Security was designed for, right? And so that's a
I go back to the point that any client, any prospective client out there, needs to hope and understand that whoever they're working with, whoever that financial professional is, that they have a process that's going to have my back, right? That's going to be help to analyze my situation, give me all the options, and help look out for not only me and my spouse, but my children as well, right? Because there's so much that goes on in one's day to day that we can't keep track of all this stuff, and it just reinforces, the power of financial advice, right? What you guys are all about.
I think you're exactly right, Mike. I can't thank you enough for taking the time to do this. Again, this is the third of 4 podcasts that we're doing with the great Mike Graci on Social Security. Thank you very much for listening, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
Until next time.